If you have a problem and you're trying to change that problem, but you feel stuck, there's a good chance that you might be attached to your problem. Hi, I'm Lacey. I am a human who just so happens to work as a mental health professional. And on this channel, I want to share things that I've seen work for myself and for clients. Maybe you've reached a point in your life where something has become a problem. Problems can come in the form of habits or behavioral problems. Sometimes some things that show up in the counseling office are depression, of course, anxiety, self-esteem issues, anger issues, interpersonal problems, people-pleasing, unhealthy eating habits, just to name a few. Usually we start contemplating making changes in our life when we start to notice negative consequences, when it feels like something's just not working anymore. But to simply stop the problem or the behavior is not that simple. And more often, we find that we feel stuck. We really want to change or do things different, but it feels like we can't. What could possibly be blocking you? In a lot of cases, the thing that feels like the problem also might have payoff or benefits. The benefits, advantages, payoff, whatever you want to call it, is the thing that's keeping us stuck. So we might really, really want to change, but there's something keeping us hooked. So I know you're probably thinking, I am not attached to my problem, and how could there possibly be benefits? But there absolutely can, because a lot of the problems that we now have didn't start out that way. It usually started out as something helpful or positive. So really what we're talking about is something called secondary gains. You may have heard of that, but if you haven't, Sigmund Freud kind of observed that people with illnesses seem to be receiving benefits in a way from being sick. So someone that is ill might start to receive compassion that they hadn't ever really received before. But it could also cause a person to avoid certain responsibilities. In another article, it was defined as the subconscious benefits a person receives from remaining unwell. And it could be due to underlying fears and needs, and not so much about being deliberately deceptive. So the term unwell was used, but it doesn't just show up for people who are physically unwell. It can show up with mental health issues, behavioral patterns, habits. So for example, I had mentioned people pleasing. You might be able to identify the benefits of people pleasing pretty easy. If a person comes in and their people pleasing has become a problem, sometimes it takes a little bit to get them to recognize how people pleasing was benefiting them. But once you start talking about it, it's kind of easy to see. It could be that you're avoiding disappointing others. You might feel safer when you perceive that everybody's happy and there's no conflict. So there is benefits and payoff to people pleasing. And like I said before, these behaviors did not start out as a problem. They started out as something that was maybe protective and felt like the right thing. And maybe when a person starts people pleasing, they see that they're having positive responses from people, and so the behavior gets reinforced. And over time, it becomes a problem. So it's also important to highlight that it's almost never the case that a person is consciously trying to manipulate other people. These behaviors and habits really develop kind of like a survival mechanism. And Freud even describes it from a psychoanalytic perspective as kind of a subconscious or libidinal drive to seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that's just human nature. We all develop behaviors and patterns that eventually become a problem. So when we begin to notice the negative consequences, we can't just stop, because there's something usually underlying why we're doing it in the first place. And that is the key sometimes to change. In behavioral analysis, one of the foundational principles is we do not repeat behaviors that we don't benefit from. That principle comes from B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning, where a behavior is strengthened by the consequences that follow. This can mean good feelings or feelings of comfort are evoked, or discomfort and bad feelings are taken away. So in my own life, I've struggled with anxiety, especially when it comes to speaking in front of large groups of people. And when you start to ask for the awareness to change, it is given to you. I started to notice years ago that when I would bring my anxiety up to people as a reason why I was reluctant to do whatever it was, whether it was speaking in front of people or attending a social gathering, I started to notice that they didn't really entertain it. I might say I was feeling anxious about doing something, and usually the response was like, okay, oh well. Around that time, I was asked to speak at a family function, and the moment I was asked, I noticed my anxiety went up, and I immediately said, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And the person's response was, okay, oh well. And in that same moment, someone close to me was also asked to speak, and they didn't hesitate to respond. They just said, sure, okay, no problem. So during the whole exchange, I noticed three things. Number one was when I was observing what was happening, I noticed the anxiety come up, but I also noticed some good feelings come up. A jolt of good feelings popped up, and I thought, why was there good feelings? I felt confused. I thought, why is there good feelings present with the anxiety? The anxiety is supposed to feel bad. These feelings are now feelings that I refer to as the ooh, and I will talk more about those in another video. For now, they were just good feelings that popped up in addition to the anxiety that caught me off guard. The second thing that I noticed was, although I had noticed it from others before, for some reason in this moment, I was really aware that the person that asked me to speak really did not entertain my hesitation or the anxiety that I was feeling or the reasons why I was hesitant. This question hit me like a ton of bricks. What was I wanting from them in that moment? What kind of response was I seeking? Because it struck me that they weren't giving me what I wanted. Maybe it was validation, maybe it was sympathy, maybe it was some sort of attention. And number three, the person who was asked after me did not hesitate to say yes. And it got me thinking, we're not that much different. Why are they able to just easily commit and I'm hesitating? Am I capable of speaking? And the answer was yes. The important part here is that, can I do this? The answer was yes. But it would sure be a lot more comfortable and easier to use my anxiety to let me off the hook. But I had reached a point where I thought, is that what I really want? Is it worth it to be let off the hook? I feel like that moment was a moment I had kind of been waiting for, because I had kind of always wished that my anxiety wasn't a problem, but I never really understood the benefits and the payoff that had me hooked to it. It was kind of like the perfect storm. And I really felt kind of silly and ridiculous for letting the anxiety be the thing that stood in my way. The new information and insights that I had gained kind of shot me out of my stuckness. And I knew that I had to let go of the attachment I had to the comfort my anxiety was kind of providing. So I agreed to speak at the family function, and did I feel anxious? I did, but it didn't stop me, because at that point I kind of could not unknow what I had come to know. I'm pretty clear today that I can have anxiety, but I can still do what I want to do. I don't have to wait for it to go away. Here in the video, I had said that these secondary gains, benefits, the payoff that you may be experiencing because of the problem are typically out of awareness. It's in your subconscious. In order for you to maybe get unstuck or really kind of see the full picture of what's happening, you have to make the subconscious conscious, creating awareness. One of the best ways to do that is to write. But before we talk about that, I do want to mention that when we start to do this work, and I'm presenting, this is not my discovery. This is something that happens with most people. If a person's not quite ready to make changes, and maybe they're still benefiting from their habits and behaviors, then if this idea is presented to them, they may be defensive, or they may not be able to figure out how they are benefiting, or they might be reluctant to do that. We often defend things that we are benefiting from, but that's okay. That might just be where they are. And if you're there, that's okay. The goal with being aware of how your problem is benefiting you is not to shame you. It can be a little bit uncomfortable to shift your thinking in that way and to be honest with yourself, but it can be really empowering. Now I'm kind of excited to figure out how a problem is operating in a person's life and what the benefits are, because I know that a lot of times that's the missing piece of the puzzle. To make the subconscious conscious, it does take a little effort. I usually write. It will take some self-reflecting, and in motivational interviewing, they often use a worksheet, and it's called the decisional balance. If you wanted to do it, you could split your paper into 4 quadrants, and you would find the disadvantages are negative consequences of the behavior, which is usually pretty easy. Then you move to finding the advantages, benefits to having the problem. It could be anything from avoiding conflict to staying in comfort zone. And then you would figure out the advantages of changing and the disadvantages of changing. At the end, I usually get the person to split the disadvantages and advantages up into a percentage equaling 100%. Sometimes a person will recognize that they're still benefiting from their problem, so then the disadvantages would have a lower score than the advantages. For example, a person who recognizes that they're still benefiting from people pleasing and they're not quite ready to let it go, they might put 60% by the advantages of people pleasing and 40% by the disadvantages. So you can see that they're still benefiting from people pleasing. So usually the negative consequences have to outweigh the benefits for a person to really want to change. And so writing this out really helps to create awareness and really kind of brings the whole picture into view and gets a person thinking about, am I truly ready to let this problem go? Because we're not always in a place where we're ready. And that kind of brings me to another thing in motivational interviewing is the concept of resistance, which it's not exclusive to motivational interviewing. Resistance happens sometimes when a therapist is pushing a little too hard to get someone to change. You can usually spot resistance when a client starts to defend their problem or kind of fight for their problem in a way. And a lot of times they do that by saying, yes, but I know it's a problem, but I can't do anything about it. That's a good place to maybe start to talk about the benefits of the problem and how that shows up. If we focus on why something is a problem too much, kind of seems to miss part of the puzzle. As I had mentioned before, generally we don't repeat behaviors we aren't benefiting from, even if we're not necessarily recognizing it in the moment. Why is it so important to become aware of the benefits and the payoff? I was watching a YouTube video of Marsha Linehan, and she's the creator of DBT, dialectical behavioral therapy. And she said that we cannot change things that we don't first accept. That kind of makes me think of Carl Rogers also, who said, a person can't change unless they first accept what's happening in their life. I also read in a recent study that acceptance was the best predictor of mental health and well-being. By accepting the whole picture of the problem, the good and the bad, that is the ticket to change. It's not easy. It's not comfortable. But if it's going to help you, it's worth it. What you can do, if you have a willingness to discover the underlying benefits or payoff and reflect and gain that awareness, then you're on your way. It can be scary at first, and sometimes you might feel a little silly, but it's those feelings that kind of propel you into the next phase. And there's no shame in taking steps to be more aware of how you operate in the world. But of course, it's always up to you. We are all on different paths and phases in our life, and you will know when you're ready. So I hope you found this video helpful. Thank you so much for watching.